credentials, whether they're academic or other kind of credentials came from. But this seems to be like a career trajectory or personal trajectory, personal desire that's pretty widely distributed, at least in the space that I see. And so that leaves really small pockets of like genuine community people, if I can come up with some kind of category of people that are outside of that set of desires. So at least in Vancouver, where we have such a huge, huge NGO space, that whole space now looks less different from the academy than it did, say, 10 years ago. Yeah, so I don't know if I have an answer for where that desire comes from. I'm not sure if people get something, if there's a benefit that's promised in these credentialing processes, I don't know. But I don't understand why you would, if you're like a community activist, why you would feel the need to have this kind of imprimatur, unless you're trying to compete with other people. I don't know, there's some complicated thing like that involved here. I think at the level of the university professors, my generation is getting old, and I think people are kind of like, they've done as much, they feel like they've done as much as they can do, and the systems are now different. And I don't really understand the young people these days. I don't understand the kind of psychic life of the young activists. And so I don't want to be that. When I was a young activist, I hated those old people that were like, no, we tried that in 1960. I was like, I will never be that person. And so I never, like, I participate in a lot of stuff, but I just kind of watch. And I feel like even if there was a request for me to share across a generational difference as the old person, I kind of don't know what I would say, because I feel like the time is really different now in ways that I don't entirely understand. And some of that is framed around our belief that there would be a revolution. Like, we actually believe that. I tell that to young people and they laugh at me. But I think that idea that there would be a breaking point somehow and some kind of big change, I think that framed a lot of what we did. And absent that, I don't quite know how to do the things I want to do. There's a group of us old people who kind of have been talking about this. Young people, we're in meetings with them, and they want to do these things, and we don't really understand. And, so there's a felt gap in our activists, old people activists, about the transferability of what we know.
I was really struck by the way you describe the place that most researchers do. You use the word Disney, research Disneyland, right? So, and I was wondering if you have encountered any research subjects who were just like, okay, here come another group of researchers again who just want to, produce outcome for their research or things like that. And I don't know, because I was a documentary filmmaker for a couple of years, and at the time, there was this drive to document the so-called marginalized people in Taiwan, right? So there were all kinds of documentary filmmakers who, just trying to now, putting this in a self-critical way. So people were trying to locate marginalized subjects in the Taiwan society and made documentaries about them, and in order to make their life visible and things like that. But I was sometimes really struck by how people were hurt during that process, because some people who were filmed were actually aware of the fact that they were just part of this strange assembly line of cultural production, right? But I suppose that the project that I think that the project that you were involved and you have been involved in has more, viable and more direct outcomes. But I guess I just wonder if you have encountered people who were aware of the fact that they did on a research Disneyland and how they come with this fact that on the one hand they actually needed the institutional support that this project might actually produce, right? But on the other hand, they might actually be aware of the fact that here you go again, another group of really well-intentioned researchers and academic activists whose life actually has nothing to do with us, right? So I'm just wondering.
No, they were totally aware, absolutely, 100% aware. There were people who made a considerable amount of money as research subjects. And so they thought of that as a piece of their income. And so as researchers, we fought actually with some of our colleagues about what is a reasonable wage. So we thought about the so-called stipend that we gave research subjects in wage terms. And there were lots of battles among researchers and with our funding agencies, because we were paying like $25 an hour. And they're like, graduate students don't get $25 an hour. We're like, they're giving us this thing. When we had research people from the community who were on our research staffs, they got paid the same wage that the graduate students got paid. So there were two different types of participation. One was people who were co-researchers, and one were people who were the research subjects. Often people were one in one project and the other in another project. So it was so, and this is one of the reasons why I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I want to do this. There was one point early in my time of doing research when I was doing a bunch of, there were co-interviews, half the staff were like marginalized, often homeless people, and the other were research assistants. So they worked together and they trained together, and then they went and did the interviews. And so, and they were all being paid the same. And in the course of doing this, I was collaborating with another colleague, and she was looking at the anonymized transcripts, and she goes, oh, I know who that is, that's so-and-so. I was like, how do you know that? She goes, I've interviewed her several times on different projects. And so I began looking at the transcripts from different projects, and I was like, it's actually not the total aggregate number of people. It's the same people being interviewed repeatedly for different projects, with some sense of what the researchers might be interested in hearing. So I had done enough ethnography and interviewing that I wasn't shocked by this. And I wasn't like too naive to realize this was going on. But I thought, if I had any lingering belief, as this generation of filmmaking did, that I'm bringing people's voices to a new place and that will do good, this is not what's happening. Something very different is happening. So yeah, I quit doing anything research. Another colleague of mine, some people don't like, he's a doctor. He was doing epidemiology work. Some of it was around HIV, but a lot of it was just around like poverty and health stuff, because we had a lot of money invested in urban health. And so he actually trained a bunch of sort of quasi-housed, unstably housed, sometimes using, sometimes not using, people to do the survey work. And so they were going around and they kind of knew how to find people. And so we were like, great, this is one of the best data sets possible. Because these are people that know and understand the community. And they're not just like sampling to get numbers, they're actually like, no, if you want that type of people, they're living in this particular housing place. And so that came back. We started doing data analysis. It was a completely quantitative study. And when he began presenting the research results, people were like, well, we're a little bit concerned about your research results. Why? Well, we're a little concerned about the data collection. Why? Because of the people that were collecting the data. And so we kept arguing, no. It's better than the, squeaky clean little grad student that you're sending out who has no idea where they are, who they're talking to, no idea whether the person's lying to them. So the people who were part of this research team were kind of like, I don't think so. And we're really better, I think, at dealing with that question of how valid is the face-to-face survey question. But the whole project was kind of dismissed as invalid because of who the research team was. So that happened about the same time as my interview stuff. So he and I began, we talked about starting a coalition called Researchers Against Research. So we both began kind of pressing our colleagues about really? That's how you're doing the interviews? There's already a whole set of interviews on that topic. Why are you doing the interviews? But, there we were. And I think the parallel you're drawing is really a good one. It's probably a temporal one, that there's a certain moment in kind of the restructuring of democratic spaces where you're like, oh my God, there's a bunch of people who haven't gotten to participate. And the people who have participated, earnest desirous to get those other people to participate. But this mechanism that we've used of documentaries and qualitative research turns out to have a lot of problems and maybe do more harm than good.
I think my question may be more related to your talk yesterday. So, because yesterday you talked about the scientists working for the government as bureaucratic scientists have this double habitus. Listening to your talk today, I'm wondering, this is also a question that might be too big, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the position of research board, the Institute of Research Board in this whole dynamics, especially what I found confusing is like, I'm originally, my undergrad training was in China, where, as I heard, there's no research board on many social science, like anthropology or sociology. And yeah, and later I came to North America, where I heard story of research board stop people doing some research.
People who were in the English department.
So I don't know. So yeah, just wondering if you can, yeah.
Well, when I was a young activist involved in AIDS work, I was, I have my own personal history of being within bureaucratic spaces. So some of my, work now about this is partially being self-critical, having been self-critical for a long time. But for a variety of reasons, I went on to the board of directors of the gay clinic in Boston. So Boston had a very small AIDS epidemic in the early 1980s, but because of the amount of biomedical research there, it was a big research site. And so naturally, the gay clinic would be a very attractive place for researchers, because this is where you were going to find this group of people that you needed to bring into the research process as bodies. And so we were like a satellite clinic. It was a unique administrative structure that had come about like as a result of a bunch of Leninist activists. So our relationship to the hospital was already kind of unique in the city. So it wasn't clear what kind of research ethics process could happen. And so the researchers, they were all at the clinic. We're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And some of it was like really crazy stuff, because in the early 80s, nobody had a clue. And so it was kind of like, we'll research anything to try to sort this out. So it was everything from like acupuncture, or left-handed people who are more likely to be gay, more likely to have AIDS. So it was kind of like crazy stuff. And we were like, even if we wanted to do all the research, there's only a small number of people who were men who were like the clients of this clinic. I think there were like 400 gay men who were the clients of the clinic. 3 of whom had AIDS at that point. And so I went to the hospital and we're like, well, you know, how does this work? And they said, well, there needs to be a research ethics board and we'll do it for you. And we were like, you know, having this Marxist-Leninist legacy to the clinic. We're like, no, you know, you will not. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to figure out how to do this. I'm always the person who's like, I'll just find it out. So at that time, there was no internet. So it turned out the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. is the thing that governs research ethics codes. They're called Offices of Research Ethics in the U.S. And so I phoned them, and I said, I'm at this clinic, and you know, with this gay population, and like the doctors are all trying to come here and do research, and we want to have some control over this. And they said, okay, here's what you have to do. And they mailed me the forms. And so I went through the process of getting our little tiny clinic certified as an official research ethics board. I think it was the first one. I've never been able to fully find this out. There may have been 1 or 2 in Oakland created by the Black Panthers back in the 70s. So there were a few efforts by community institutions to create these ethics boards. So there we were, this tiny little thing with the research ethics board. So I became the chair of the research ethics board because no one else knew what we were supposed to do. So I'm like, it says here. So, you know, we had a lot of problems because we were like, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. So we were like kind of making it up as we went along. But I learned at that point sort of how the process is supposed to work. And so this would be like 1982, 83. This is relatively early in the history of research ethics, actually. We think of research